Have you had the feeling that a story was trying to tell you something deeper than it seemed? How behind each paragraph had a hidden truth waiting to be revealed? Today, you will find out what Dickens really wrote between the lines, a truth that is not only in the books but also in your life. Get ready. You will never see your works the same way. If this message touches you, write, "I want to see the truth," and subscribe to the channel to continue receiving deep reflections that they transform. Before the world knew the name Charles Dickens with reverence, before his words were repeated in classrooms, stages, and bookstores, he was just a forgotten boy. Not an acclaimed wandering, not a promising young man, only a child erased by pain. His childhood was marked not by books, but by burdens, not by applause, but by silence. It was invisible to a society that only saw the strong and ignored the fragile. At 12, Dickens was not reading novels. He was trapped in a grease factory, working endless hours in the dirt, odors, loneliness. While other children attended schools, he rubbed labels in pots to survive. There was no birthday party. There was no protection. The only constant thing was abandonment. And it was there in the darkest of the basements that something was lit. A fierce, silent, observant consciousness. He began to see the world with eyes of those who no longer expected to be saved. And so he saw more than the others. His pain was not accidental. It was molding, and in a way deliberate, because the system that ignored him, which locked his father for debt, which forced him to work as an adult as a boy, this same system produced thousands of silent Charles every day. But only one chose to transform this silence in the voice. Injustice did not shut him up. She taught him how to write. Dickens did not start writing for fame. He started urgently, for the need to say what no one said, to face the invisible, to scream for those who have never been heard. And all this started there, the exact moment his childhood was taken from him. This is the secret that few know. Behind the brightness of their words, there was a shadow. The shadow of a child who has learned too early that the world can be cruel, and that no one will come if you do not learn to scream with your own ink. The secret that Dickens hid in his stories is not just the moving characters. It is at the origin of the author himself. It's on the boy who lost everything, and yet he decided to write. It is in the strength of someone who, instead of letting the pain consumed him, decided to turn it into a lighthouse. Because sometimes what we need most is not to erase pain, but convert it into language, in gun, in legacy. The truth that Dickens hid, or rather revealed silently, is that the pain did not destroy him. She built him, she pushed him into her, and from there he brought a whole world of voices that no one listened to. It was not the glory that made him write. It was the loss. It was not comfort. It was the absence. And maybe, therefore, your literature is still alive. Because it was born of something real, raw, and deeply human. Charles Dickens's childhood was faded by pain, but his pain rekindled light in millions of others. Reading Charles Dickens is, for many, an exercise in literary beauty. But for those who watch more carefully, their books are much more visceral, camouflage screams hidden between commas, dialogues, and descriptions. Every work of yours is a disguised form of protest, a manifest crashed of fiction. Dickens's penalty was a blade, and every story he wrote was a way of breaking silence, of denouncing a civilized world while allowing the vulnerable to be crushed. Dickens understood the power of the narrative. He knew that often the truth openly said is ignored, but the story told in the form of history finds home in the most closed hearts. Therefore, he created orphans, miserable, cruel gentlemen, inhuman institutions, not to fill pages, but to reveal what Victorian society hid under the rug. When he wrote Oliver Twist, he was not just telling the life of an orphan boy. He was showing the world with paint and pain what he himself saw on the streets, the alleys, the small hands working, the tired eyes of those who have never had a choice. This is what he did. He turned reality into fiction to make her bearable but never harmless. His books were broken, fragmented, sharp mirrors. They didn't just show England's face, showed the cracks that no one wanted to admit. And every character he created was an echo of someone real. A man he saw sleep in the gutter, a child he met at the factory, a woman forgotten by the aristocratic halls. Nothing was by chance. Dickens knew exactly what he was doing. He shaped his plots with surgical precision. He put his characters in limitation situations, not to thrill, but to provoke. Their stories forced the reader to see each other in the face of the suffering of others. What's more, to wonder how tolerated that suffering was, or even perpetuated by its own omission. Your books are not hobbies, these are complaints. And this is perhaps the most uncomfortable truth. The great genius of literature was first and foremost an activist, a man who could not scream, then wrote, who could not accuse with his fingers, so he used the words, and so he embarrassed governments, unmasked structures, and pulled tears from those who were once indifferent. Reading Dickens is listening to stuffy shouts for time. It is realizing that what he fights still lives among us. It is understanding that he did not just write to entertain, wrote to wake up. Each chapter, every scene of pain, every injustice portrayed was a clear message. Look again, see what is before you, and if you have the courage, change. And you? How many stories have swallowed like fiction only? How many shouts have you been going through not knowing where to look? Dickens taught us to listen with our eyes, to see with our hearts, because their stories are not just dusty past. They are mirrors now. The pain he narrated still exists, and the screams, even camouflaged, still echo. In many of Charles Dickens's novels, children occupy the center of the narrative. They are orphans, street boys, forgotten daughters, small workers. At first glance, they just look like emotional choices, characters created to play the reader. But the truth hidden under the literary varnish is much deeper. Dickens used these children as mirrors. Mirrors that, in reflecting the purity of childhood, widened the cruelty of the adult world. Why are so many of their protagonists young? Because the child, by definition, represents what should be protected. The child is vulnerable, sincere, entrusted, and exactly for this reason, she is also the biggest victim of a society that fails. Dickens understood this with brutal precision. He himself was this child, launched in the world ahead of time, forced to work, forgotten by the authorities, wounded by a structure he said to protect, but only oppressed. He knew on his skin the impact of having his childhood stolen, and decided to use it as language. Writing about children, Dickens created a painful contrast: the innocence of the little versus the coldness of the great. The boy who asks for more soup and is punished. The young woman who dreams of dignity and is sold to misery. The child who loves and is rejected. These are stories that on the outside look like tales, but inside they are fierce complaints. He used the disguise of tenderness to reveal the contempt, and few realized. Children's stories in Dickens are strategies. He knew the reader disarms himself before a child, and this is when the truth comes in, without asking for permission. While many Liam thrilled about the small protagonists, Dickens made them face a world where adults became accomplices of the suffering of the innocent. He did not need to scream with political speeches. It was enough to show a child being crushed by indifference and let the discomfort do the rest. But his genius was also in the way he balanced it all with hope. He did not make the children passive victims. He gave them strength, courage, dignity. They not only suffered, they resisted, they dreamed, they loved it, even without receiving anything in return. And it is in this resistance that the most powerful criticism lives. Because the greatest attack on the cynicism of a cold society is the purity that insists on not dying, even in the face of abandonment. Dickens's stories were not written just to entertain. They were designed to poke, to make it discomfort, to make the reader ask, what are we doing with our children? What are we allowing them to live? Worse, what are we reproducing without realizing it every day? The child, for Dickens, was a symbol of everything the world should protect, but often destroys. By placing these little ones in the center of his works, he was saying with elegance and pain, look again, they are here, and you pretend they don't see. And maybe to this day, we are still pretending. Perhaps no figure created by Charles Dickens is as famous as Ebenezer Scrooge. A Christmas tale, so often adapted, softened, and romanticized, has become synonymous with Christmas spirit and generosity. But the truth hidden behind the Scrooge figure goes far beyond the happy ending. The essence of this character is not just that of an old Ranzinza who rediscovers love. It's a dark alert, a cruel mirror that Dickens extends us, hoping that we have the courage to face it. Scrooge is all of us, not as caricature but as a symbol. He represents what happens to the human soul when it is too wounded and learns to protect itself in the worst way, hardening. Scrooge was not born cold. He became that way. By choices, by loss, by poorly digested bitterness. He exchanged affection for control, exchanged bonds for security, exchanged simple joy for the illusion of power. And this silent transformation is what makes the tale so disturbing, because she is real. Dickens knew that evil does not manifest itself only in major, cruel actions. Sometimes it arises in the closure of the heart, in the refusal to feel, in the inability to care, and that is what he wanted to show. A Christmas Tale is not a light story. It is a denunciated denunciation of hope. It is a call to consciousness, a soft but firm scream against everyday selfishness. Dickens used the glow of parties, bells, ghosts and suppers not to entertain, but to awaken. Scrooge is the portrait of those who allowed suffering to shape their worldview. He represents those who, after being injured, swear never to feel, that hide behind work, money, routines, that justify hardness with logic and indifference with experience. Life is hard, they say, but Dickens's question is different. Does it need to be that hard? Worse, do we need to be that hard with each other? The tale only becomes powerful because Scrooge changes, not by chance, but by confrontation. He is forced to see, not the world around him, but himself. It is this shock with the reflection that transforms it. And there is the truth that many ignore. Redemption only begins when we have the courage to see who we become. Dickens once again takes us by the hand to the pain, not to crush us, but to show us our way back. The truth hidden in Scrooge is that he is human, and so possible to repeat, possible to change, and that scares us, for perhaps the hardened heart that he carries also, silently, inside us. Maybe we are not so different. And perhaps we are like him, in need of a ghost or a fright that forces us to remember who we were one day. Dickens didn't just want to thrill with happy endings. He wanted to provoke hard reflections with possible paths. And with Scrooge, he reminded us of something essential. It's never too late to change, but only changes those who have the courage to look inside, who faces the truth, who listens to the silence that comes from the soul, and who understands that living without love is not living. It is just resisting. Oliver Twist is not just a character, he is a scream, a relief request echoing behind well-written pages, behind a romance that the whole world knows, but few have really heard. Oliver is the boy no one wanted, the son of nowhere, of absence, of social failure, a symbol not only of poverty, but of abandonment, of forgetfulness, and that's precisely why Dickens created him. So no one else could say, "I didn't know." When Oliver Twist wrote, Dickens was not trying to move, he was trying to bother. He had been that invisible child. He knew what it was like to feel hungry, to be ignored, to be treated as a number. And I also knew that the world would rather not look at these wounds. It was easier to pretend they didn't exist, that boys like Oliver were exceptions, accidents, but they were everywhere. In overcrowded orphanages, in unhealthy factories, in cold and dangerous streets, children without name, without voice, without anyone. Oliver is the face given to what was anonymous. Its history is built with real pain, observed and lived by Dickens himself. There is no exaggeration, there is no fanciful invention. Each suffering experienced by Oliver was somehow witnessed by the author, and each chapter was actually an attempt to tear out readers of indifference. When the boy dared to ask for more food, he is not just hungry, he is breaking with the role of society has imposed him, to accept. He refuses to die in silence, and it is this gesture that makes Oliver so dangerous to the system that surrounds him, because he insists on existing. He insists on having value, even when everything and everyone around try to convince it is worth nothing. Dickens knew that to change the world, he needed to change his perception. And there is no more powerful perception than that of a wounded child asking to be seen. Therefore, he built Oliver with tenderness and courage. He did not make him perfect. It did not shield him against suffering, but it did not reduce it to the victim either. Oliver has strength. It has survival instinct. It has above all a deep desire to be loved. And that's where Dickens's cry is. Look at them. See what you refuse to see. These children exist. They are around you. They may not be called Oliver, but they carry the same hungry eyes, the same dense silences, the same fragile hope that still insists on surviving. And if you pretend you don't see them, you'll just be repeating the error that Dickens it is not correcting with your art. Oliver Twist is more than a classic novel. It is a complaint dressed in literature, a delicate punch, a supplication. Don't let these children disappear, because the worst form of cruelty is not punishment, it is forgetfulness. And Dickens, with his sharp sentence, refused to forget. He looked into his tired eyes of the lost childhood and placed them in the center of history. And now, after reading, the question is, what are you going to do with it? There are books that seem fiction, but they are actually embarrassed confessions. David Copperfield is one of them. Among his pages, Charles Dickens not only created a memorable protagonist, he hid himself. He hid because perhaps it was still too much, because maybe he had to count without seeming to be asking for compassion. And then, disguised as a plot, he offered his own story to the world. But who reads with a careful eyes realizes David is Charles. The trajectory of one is the meat and paint reflection of the other. Abandonment, poverty, child labor, rejection, everything is there. Not as a backdrop, but as a backbone of the novel. David Copperfield crosses the pages with the same weights Dickens carried. A childhood stolen by not his own debts, an absent father, a mother who could not protect him, and a system that does not forgive fragility. The boy who will stop in a cruel boarding school, who is sent to degrading work, who knows the contempt long before he understands the world. He is not an invention, it is memory. When writing David Copperfield, Dickens did not seek mercy. He sought understanding. I wanted readers to feel on the skin what it was like to grow without being seen. I wanted the pain to have a face, that the trauma had context. May suffering gain voice, not only as a social denunciation, but as a universal human experience, because the pain has a name, and when reading, you realize that name can be yours too. All of us, at some point in our lives, are David Copperfield. We have already been thrown into circumstances we didn't choose. We already carried guilt that was not ours. We have already sought, between losses and rejections, a place where we felt belonging. And just like him, many try to keep some hope alive, even when the world insists on erase it. What Dickens did with this novel was bold. He gave us his own soul, but disguised in chapters. He invited us to walk among his ghosts, his silences, his fears. And yet, he did it with elegance. Never forcing, never shouting, just letting the pain speak for itself. In the voice of a character who is at the same time mirror and shield, David Copperfield is not just a beautiful story, it is a journey of survival, proof that it is possible to cross the abandonment without losing the ability to feel. That trauma may even mark us, but you don't have to define us. That the injured boy can become an entire man if he has the courage not to forget who he was. And perhaps this is the biggest lesson in the book, not escaping the past, but giving it a new place, not as prison, but as a root, because it is from the roots, even the most painful, that the strength of remaining is born. Dickens knew that pain only transforms when it is named, and with David Copperfield he named his, not out of vanity, but out of necessity, not to expose, but to release. And now you may also look at your own pain, and understand that it also has a name, also wants to be heard, can also be written, to finally be redeemed. While the Victorian literature celebrated noble heroes, novels between high castes, and moral luxury scenarios, Charles Dickens followed the opposite. He did not seek applause from the elite, sought to give voice to those who were never heard. Lawless orphans, beggars, exploited workers, invisible maids, street boys, forgotten girls, all of them, who were until then only part of the urban landscape or social statistics, became protagonists in his work, and not for pity, by justice. The pain of these people was not new in the world. What was new and revolutionary was to see someone like Dickens to choose with dignity, turn it into narrative, give it place, value, name. When Victorian England preferred to look at industrial progress and the advance of big cities, Dickens forced his readers to face what was behind the gears: hungry children, humiliated women, families crushed by debt, ordinary people with aborted dreams and forgotten hopes. And the strongest, he did not portray them as resigned victims, but as whole, complex, worthy human beings. This choice was not an artistic whim, it was courage, because giving space to the suffering of the invisible was also an affront to the system that profited with this silence. Dickens knew it bothered. He knew some readers wrinkled their nose as they saw their plots dive into such rough realities. But he doesn't. He retreated, wrote firmly, with compassion, and with a moral urgency that is still felt today. Each line that wrote carried the weight of those who could not speak. And in a way he became a bridge among those who lived the pain and those who could change it, but pretended that it did not exist. Instead of entertaining happy endings and arranged marriages, Dickens wide its hunger, the injustice, the abandonment. He forced us to look at what we prefer to ignore, the real existence of those who are discarded by the social look. Today, when we look at your works with admiration, we may forget how radical they were in their time, because it was not common nor acceptable to humanize the poor, denounce the abuses, expose institutional hypocrisy. Dickens did this when it was still dangerous, and so each paragraph of yours is an act of resistance, each invisible character who gained voice, a small literary miracle. And there is a particular force in his writing. He doesn't just invite us to feel sorry, he summons us to active empathy. It does not paint the powerful as one-dimensional villains, nor transforms the poor into saints. He just shows, with frankness, with pain, with humanity. And in doing so, it invites the reader to a decision. Are you going to keep applauding those who have a voice, or will you finally listen to who never had? The pain of the invisible still exists. It is on the streets, in the homes, in the silent corridors of hospitals and institutions. Dickens taught us that if we have the gift of seeing, we also have a duty to act. Writing about the forgotten was not fashionable. It was courage. And more than that, it was a reminder. Literature, just like life, is only complete when it includes everyone. In Charles Dickens, nothing is by chance. There is no character who exists just to fill a page. There is no dialogue that only serves to move the plot. There is no destination that does not carry a message together, an alert. He wrote us who planted signs, and every name he chose, every trajectory he drew, every silence he left between speech and another, everything was thought to wake up to those who were willing to see beyond the story. Your books are not just fiction. They are spiritual, social, and moral maps. And for those who read with their hearts, not just eyes, these maps reveal much more than a plot. They reveal the soul of a society, reveal what is wrong in us, reveal what needs to be transformed. The beggar is not just the poor, it is the portrait of our neglect. The orphan is not just the child without parents, it is the symbol of our lack of care. The miser is not just greedy, it shows what happens to those who lose their soul trying to protect their pockets. The mistreated woman, the exploited worker, the young man who dreams and is crushed by reality, each one exists to remind us of something we are ignoring. Dickens did not write to please, he wrote to denounce, to open eyes, to disturb consciousness that sleep in peace as the world moans. And that's why your books still burn, because the complaint remains. The structure changes its clothes, but the system remains the same. There are still those who send and those who shut up, those who suffer and those who turn their face. And Dickens, with his sharp feather and restless soul, keeps whispering through the pages. Do you see? Do you understand? Or will you keep pretending to be just a story? He knew that many would not understand. He knew that social criticism disguised as fiction would go unnoticed by hasty eyes. But he wrote anyway, because there would always be someone who would read with the heart. There would always be a soul ready to be touched, and when touched, change. Dickens used names as codes. He gave the characters traces that carried more than characteristics, carried messages. The cruel had a dry name, the innocent, a fragile name, the hypocrite, a name that sounded false. Every detail served a greater purpose, to reveal, in the disguise of fiction, the truths that society refused to say aloud. Behind each character, there is a warning, an invitation to reflection, a provocation, and one choice. Let's just follow the story, or will we allow it to transform us? Because Dickens didn't just want readers. I would like awake. I would like an accomplices of change. And for that, he wrote with the blood of his own experience. It did not seek admiration, sought impact. Who reads Dickens in a hurry ends with a plot. Who reads carefully ends with a wound. Who reads with the heart ends with a mission. Charles Dickens was a master of the complaint, but never had to raise his voice. He did not need to position himself as a direct accuser or preach with inflamed speeches. He chose another way, one subtler, deeper, more effective: fiction. With each work, Dickens conducted an invisible judgment, not in a conventional court, but in the face of the reader's consciousness. And the defendants were all there. The prisons, the and inhuman, bureaucratic and unfair courts, negligent orphanages, silent systems. Dickens saw all this not from afar, but inside. He himself was hit by these structures. His father was arrested for debt. He lived child labor, witnessed the indifference of justice, felt the institutional abandonment. And it was from this experienced experience, not just observed, that sprang up his indignation. But instead of turning her pain into manifest, he turned her into stories. And stories, when told, have the power to accuse without screaming. In Bleak House, it shows such a slow and corrupted legal system that destroys entire lives before reaching a conclusion. In Little Dorrit, he denounces the arrest for debt and the absurdities of incarceration of entire families for financial reasons. In Oliver Twist, he reveals the horrors of orphanages and the cruelty with which they treated children who had already lost everything. In each work, a scenario. In each scenario, a silent sentence against society that allows, accepts, repeats. Dickens didn't need to write, "This is unfair." He showed, and made the reader feel, to see the absurdity with your own eyes, without explanations. He drove the reader to the crime scene and let the impact speak for himself. Because when a story thrills and bothers you at the same time, it becomes impossible to ignore. And that is what he wanted. No one else pretended not to know. The judgment he promoted was moral, ethical, human, and above all, transformative. Because unlike the cold laws it criticized so much, their stories thought it was not to condemn, but to awaken. Dickens believed that if people clearly seen what was before them, they might want to change. Maybe they got up. Maybe they would fight. And that is what makes your work so current. The arrests have changed their names, but exclusion continues. The orphanages gave way to other forms of abandonment. The courts continue slow to the poor and agile for the powerful. And Dickens, even centuries later, still whispers, "Look carefully. Are you too comfortable with the unacceptable?" Each chapter he wrote was somehow a verdict. Each character, a witness. And every reader, a silent juror. The judgment of society was not done with hammer and toga. It was made with emotion and mirror. Because in moving us with the pain of others, he forced us to look at our own indifference. Dickens didn't shout it, but no one was unharmed from his reading. He proved that words, when placed with truth, may be sharper than any court sentence. And it left us a responsibility. If we now see what we did not see before, what will we do with it? There are stories that entertain, others that distract. But the stories of Charles Dickens, they bleed. Not because he has exaggerated in paint, but because every page he wrote was wet with the bitter water of his own experience. His novels thrill us not because they are imaginative, but because they are incredibly real, so real that sometimes they hurt more than their own life. And that's why, reading Dickens, we feel more than empathy. We feel identification. Dickens did not need to invent pain. He just had to remember, reorganize the shadows of the past in the form of a plot. Losses, fears, abandonment, humiliation, silence, rejection, everything was already there. He just changed the names, the scenarios, the faces. The wounds were old, but the clothes were new. And that's why their books played, and they still play, the most intimate of those who read with an open heart. Because deep down, we all carry any of these wounds. You may never have worked in a factory as a child, but you know what it is to feel explored. It may never have been an orphan, but has already known emotional abandonment. You may never have slept on the street, but you felt the cold of human indifference. The pain Dickens narrates is not stuck in the 19th century. She lives inside us, and so your stories go beyond time, because they speak of what is eternal, the struggle for dignity, the desire to be seen, the search for meaning in the midst of chaos. Dickens understood that sometimes it is in fiction that we can see reality more clearly, because fiction allows us to lower the defenses, gives us truths disguised as characters. It allows us to cry for another, to in the background start to cry for ourselves. It is a subtle but powerful process, and that's what he did, book after book. He put his pain on paper so that we recognized ours, and more than that, he showed that pain, however cruel, can transform, that the wound need not be end, that it is possible to write from it, not pity, but with purpose. That fiction need not hide reality. It can open, and that when written with truth it heals. Yes, healing, because there is something deeply therapeutic to see yourself in a story, to realize that you are not alone, that someone in another time and space felt what you feel now and survived, that there is life after rejection, that there is redemption after the error, that there is beauty even in pain if it is placed at the service of the other. Dickens was not just an author. It was a survivor who decided to turn his trauma into a trail, a literary trail where millions have passed and have come out different, more conscious, more human, more awake. When fiction is more real than life, it is because there is too true hidden between the lines. And truth, as he taught us, has the power to set free, even or especially the truths that hurt. Charles Dickens did not hide the truth. He did not write indecipherable between, nor disguised his intentions under complex layers. On the contrary, he opened. He shouted in silence, planted obvious seeds, only in dry soil. The truth was there on each page, in every character that suffered silent, in every scene that described with pain and tenderness. But we choose not to see, because seeing it hurts, feeling compromises. Understanding requires action, and most prefers the fiction that comforts, not the one they confront. Dickens did not write for distraction, wrote for transformation. And so, his truth was uncomfortable. He didn't throw her on his face. He whispered her accurately. I said a lot in the breaks, in the eyes between characters, in everyday absurdity portrayed with cruel naturalness. Who read carefully felt the thud. Anyone who read in a hurry found just a good story. But it was always there. The complaint, the criticism, compassion, hope hidden under the rubble of suffering. He did not seek perfect heroes, nor did I create one-dimensional villains, because I knew that the truth of life is more complex, that there is innocence in those who make mistakes, and coldness in the smile, that not every orphan is pure and not every judge is fair. He painted reality with real colors, and that's what bothers you the most, because it forces us to reflect on ourselves. And what do we do with these seeds? Some people read Dickens as one who flies an old newspaper, historical curiosity, literary beauty. But others allow something to spring up. These, yes, understand, because for the truth of Dickens to flourish, it takes more than reading. It is necessary to feel, to put yourself in the other's shoes, to recognize that perhaps we are part of the problem, or that we have been victims of it. And now we need to break the cycle. The truth that Dickens wrote only blooms on sensitive ground. Armored hearts do not reap compassion. Hurried glances do not perceive injustices. But who to read with an open chest find much more than words, finds a mirror, and the chance to become someone better. Because the truth he offered was not theoretical, it was lived. He saw the pain closely. He carried the rejection in his own body. He worked when he should play. He cried when no one heard, and survived, not just to tell, but to wake up. Your legacy is not just literary, it's human, ethical, spiritual. And so the final question is not, what did Dickens mean? What are you willing to feel? Because the seeds are already planted. It is up to us to allow them to grow. Don't read Dickens with your eyes just. Read with the heart. Read with the soul willing. Because on each page, in each paragraph, there is more than fiction. There are mirrors. Mirrors that don't just show the characters, but reveal you. Your choices, your silences, your omissions, their wounds, and also their possibilities. Dickens not only wrote to entertain, he wrote to wake up consciousness, to poke dormant souls, to remember that literature, when it is true, is not only used to pass time, it serves to transform who we are. So today, in the face of this silent mirror, your words put us, it's time to declare, I want to see the truth. I want to see beyond the plot, beyond the speeches well built. I want to see the boy hidden behind Oliver, the bitter old man that exists within Scrooge, the wounded soul that pulsates in David Copperfield. I want to see the pain Dickens lived, the courage he had, the compassion he chose, because only then do your stories stop being past and become alive mirrors in my present. Reading with your eyes is easy, but seeing with the heart requires delivery, requires to be touched, revived, confronted. Because the truth that Dickens offers does not come ready, she is discovered. It is born when you allow yourself to feel. When you let tears come up, not just for the character, but for everything you haven't seen in yourself. Hunger, rejection, hardening, coldness. How many times have we been what did he describe? But now you know. Now you saw it. And with that comes a call. Don't close your eyes. Do not erase the flame. Don't go back to blindness fortable before. The truth may hurt at first, but it is the only real bridge for freedom. Dickens planted seeds in each sentence, but they only flourish in the soul that wants to see. Then declare, aloud or silent, I want to see the truth. I want to see what I ignored. I want to recognize what I denied. I want to transform what I hardened. I no longer want to consume stories to escape reality. I want to embrace stories that give me back to myself, because living awakening is an act of courage, and reading Dickens with the heart is an exercise of faith, faith in the possibility of changing, loving, seeing the other as part of me, to write a new chapter beyond fiction, a chapter in which the truth is not avoided but welcomed, where the invisible are not forgotten, where stories are not walls but windows, and when the truth finally finds shelter inside you, then everything changes, because from that moment, you don't read Dickens anymore. You continue what he started. Charles Dickens was not just a writer, he was a social prophet, a man who turned his pain into narrative and his revolt into compassion. His stories are still alive, because injustice still breathes. But you can be part of the change. Subscribe to the channel, enjoy this video, and activate the bell here. Each video is an invitation to see beyond words.